yourself for invasion. This is Indie Invasion.
Welcome to Twisted Tales. Tales set in the world of Twisted, a steampunk skirmish game by Demented Games. This is Eric here from Indie Invasion, and today's tale, The Telling, written by Peter Overton and read by our very own Mac.
The Telling. The sewer grate lifted an inch or two, and a long, leathery snout poked out, gingerly sniffing at the foggy night air. Below, in the faded tunnels, stood a small group of short, ragged figures, each clutching a wickedly shaped knife or axe. Some held short, crudely made guns, which they waved about carelessly to the consternation of their companions. At the base of the sewer shaft stood Dodger, his engine humming gently as he anxiously rocked back and forth on his mono-wheel lower half. He was always a touch jittery before a big job, and the task ahead of him was of some significance. Dodger hadn't been there when Bill had blasted Riley the barkeep back to his maker, but he'd seen the Irken come back, shaking with terror and covered in gore. Best not to ponder too much, Dodger muttered to himself. How Bill handles himself ain't none of my business. At Bill's command, Dodger was going up top to speak to whoever was now in charge of their local watering hole, and make sure Riley's replacement understood the arrangements Bill had put in place, and maintained a steady flow of victuals and ale. Deep down, when push came to shove and things turned nasty, the truth was that Dodger wasn't entirely comfortable with violence. Sure, it had its place, but he never enjoyed it. Certainly never delighted in it like Bill or the Irken. Besides, he thought to himself, the punters up top need to be frightened, but not so terrified that he's willing to call the peelers. There was a hiss of steam as a long, telescoped stilt retracted, bringing the Irken, who had been peeking out of the opening above, back to Dodger's level. No sign of Roser's dodge, the Irken said, his voice muffled by the leather mask with its beak-like snout. Couldn't smell a one of 'em, and you knows how good I smells 'em, Dodge. Right then, Dodger called. Let's get going, lads. There was a flurry of activity as half a dozen Irken clambered up the shaft into the foggy alley above. With practiced skill, they erected a makeshift gantry, and within minutes, Dodger was hauled up to the street level. This was Dodger's sole regret about his new legs. Since his transformation during the twisting, he could barely climb an inch. He could whip in and out of a crowd and be gone with a sack full of wallets before anyone knew he was there, and in a chase, the peelers stood no chance. But his wheeled lower half meant there were some things he could no longer manage, climbing a ladder amongst them. The Grey Goose was only 2 doors down from the sewer entrance. Fagin and Dodger had painstakingly mapped every tunnel and exit in the Den of Thieves, and they knew the area like the back of their hands. You always knew the best way out when you were a pickpocket. At least you did, if you were smart and wanted to live to see the next sunrise. Dodger trundled over to the door of the pub and pushed it open, allowing greasy light and raucous laughter to spill out into the dark alley. At this time of night, the place was crowded, full of harlots, smoke, and the reek of cheap gin. Few patrons threw the strangely agile, semi-mechanical form of Dodger more than a glance. Most of them knew Dodger from before the twisting, and they all knew that Dodger worked for Bill. Weaving through the crowd, Dodger drew up to the bar and shouted for the barmaid. "Here, wench!" He piped loudly. "Fetch the governor." But instead, the woman shot Dodger a meaningful glance, motioning to the door with the slightest nod of her head. Dodger, catching the subtle message, was immediately on high alert. Must be Rozzers, he thought in dismay. Damn that rat catcher. He was wrong this time. A disturbance at the back of the room drew Dodger's attention. Angry cries and the sound of breaking glass pierced the smoky haze, as tables overturned and tankards smashed. Rising from the chaos of fallen revelers and fleeing strumpets was a figure, a very tall, very dangerous-looking figure. At first glance, Dodger thought he was looking at a toff, but instead of expensive cloth, his topcoat and elegant hat appeared to be wrought from fine steel. Yet there was less a clank than a whisper as he moved, his every motion fluid and full of deadly intent. Time to scarp her, Dodger thought, as from the corner of his eye he saw a long weapon come to bear. The muzzle of the rifle was fully 6 foot from the stock, its lines long, graceful, and deadly. The mixture of straw and beer on the cobbled floor caused Dodger's wheel to spin and slip as he wildly accelerated, tipping him forwards abruptly. A deafening report rang out, and as Dodger slid sideways, a great shell ripped through the room, roaring with blue flame before thudding into a wooden beam that exploded in a shower of splinters. As Dodger glanced back, he noted that the smoking hole in the oak support was just where his head had been only moments before. He looked towards the steel-clad gentleman and saw, to his horror, a trail of red ruin cut through those unfortunate patrons, unlucky enough to have been in the shell's path. Everywhere, people screamed and moaned, clutching at bloody stumps or great penetrating wounds. Hastily, Dodger found his balance and roared towards the door, oblivious to anyone who lay in his path. A mysterious armored figure leapt through the crowd, drawing an imposing sword. The door was mere feet away when Dodger risked another furtive glance. McGugan, the blacksmith, had risen up to throw a huge anvil-like fist towards the sword-wielding nightmare. The blow never landed. With a whip-like movement, the cold, courtly figure brought up his sword, and with a smug grin, drove the blade firmly through the wide chest of the smith. As he sped out the door, Dodger grabbed the 2 Urkins standing watch outside and shoved them into the room behind him. That oughter slow him up a touch, Dodger thought, but as he motored away down the alley, the steel gentleman emerged from the Grey Goose, smoke and carnage in his wake. "Whoever you are," Dodger shrieked back over his shoulder, "Bill will have your hide for this." The gentleman replied in a condescending voice, which cut the air like a blade. "I am Lancelot. Inform Bill. He is on my list." With that, Dodger dropped into the shaft in the safety of the sewer. Bill was not going to be happy. Not happy at all.
Thanks, guys, for listening to today's tales. You can find our Indie Invasion podcast on all podcast platforms, including Podbean, Google, and iTunes. And please visit us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and if you can, support us on Patreon/Indie Invasion. And feel free to email us with any questions or comments at indieinvasion@gmail.com. And remember, guys, don't forget to prepare yourself for the invasion.